All right, well, welcome to day 4 of Stormwater Awareness Week, and this is part 4 of our review through the Construction General Permit, the new one, the 2022 CGP. And on day 1, we went over the permitting transition and some of the new permitting scenarios. Then on day 2, we covered the QSP, QSD rules and new things that QSPs and QSDs have to do. And then yesterday, we looked at the inspection and monitoring program, and we saw that in some ways nothing changed, but in other ways everything changed. And so today we are turning our focus to BMPs. In fact, this is the segment that I've been dreading a little bit, in that there is so much material to go through. I'm going to feel like Chris Brown. You know, I got a lot to cover in an hour. So we are going to jump into it as soon as possible here. But my approach to this morning is going to be I wanted to give both a comprehensive and cohesive view of the BMPs. I thought to just pull out new areas might make it kind of fragmented. So what I want to do is really walk through the list of BMPs. Now we'll go through those things that haven't changed that much. We'll go through those pretty quickly. And if you have questions, put it in the chat, as we've been doing all along, and we'll try to get to those. We'll try to keep an eye on it so that if it fits in with our discussion, I'll cover it right there. Or as time allows, we'll cover it at the end of the class. You'll want to do that. But yeah, we're going to try to walk through them in a cohesive, comprehensive way. And so here's where we've been going to part 4. We're on BMP changes. Tomorrow will be our last one. We'll cover TMDLs. And then here's my credentials, QSP, QSD, and I'm a trainer of record with the CASCA QSP, QSD program. And as I've been mentioning all along, this is not the official 2022 CGP training. There is an official one that you're going to be required to do. We covered that on the first day, but go to the CASCA website. You see it right here, and you can find more information and links to how to take that reissuance training. It's about 4 hours of video training with some learning quizzes that you can't fail, because you get unlimited tries to pass. So, and we've covered this several times already, but you know, this training is unofficial, as I just mentioned, and the subject material is new. Therefore, the interpretation is going to be somewhat fluid for the first little while. We're all trying to figure this out. And if you want a good feel for that, just watch yesterday's keynote that I did with the regional board and the state water board. And I think you'll see that they also are working this out as well. So, all right, let's take a look now at BMPs in this permit. So we're going to start in the order, but then we'll end up really covering attachment D mostly. But let's look at the order. And there was a couple of things here that's worth mentioning. One that's kind of new. And it says that trained personnel and BMP materials need to be available at the site as required by this general permit. And we'll see another reference to that in attachment D as well. So the trained personnel isn't so much the new part, but it's the requirement to stockpile BMP materials. And there'll be a little bit more detail, not much more, but a little bit more detail in attachment D. If you've been on Caltrans jobs, that has always been a requirement, and so it will feel very much like that. In fact, in attachment D, it will say the one thing you don't have to stockpile would be sprayed on materials. You know, we don't have to have bags of hydraulic mulch sitting there ready to go, because it's the understanding that hydro seeding contractor is going to bring out the material with them. So it makes no sense to stockpile that. But fiber roll, gravel bags, silt fence, all of that's going to need to be stockpiled. Now, it doesn't go into any more detail as far as how much or what exactly you need to have stockpiled. But, you know, if you have an inspector come to your job site and they're looking around, they don't see any BMPs installed, and the excuse is, oh yeah, we're going to get to that next week, isn't really going to fly, because they're going to then point to this requirement, go, yeah, but you're supposed to have them stockpiled in here ready to go, so where are they? So it's really kind of to tighten up that I would say accountability to have a robust and effective BMP program, which means having the materials you need available. And of course, the basic standard for all BMPs is that BAT-BCT, best available technology, best conventional technology. You need to have that on site or in your BMPs. That needs to be a part of your BMPs. And that's a changing standard. Now, we're not going to go too much into that because we could spend the whole time just talking about BAT-BCT. Now, there's a couple big areas of BMPs that we've already discussed this week in other workshops. So passive treatment, a new area, attachment G of the permit. Lots of BMP requirements in that attachment, but there's already been 2 really good workshops on it. So I would point you just to the passive treatment technologies, power of polyacrylamide, that was done by APS, and then erosion control BMPs versus passive treatment done by LSC Environmental. Both of those workshops are already available on the Stormwater Awareness Week website. And then yesterday, I was talking with the water board and 4 regional boards about dewatering, and there are dewatering BMPs. And so I would point you to that keynote, which has been recorded and I think uploaded this morning. So you can, if you missed that yesterday, you can watch that, and we won't take the time to cover the BMPs with that. But with that, we're going to now turn our attention to where most of the BMPs are contained in the permit, and that would be attachment D. And I'm pretty much going to walk through that. So if you're following along in your permit, by all means, open up to attachment D and you can track along with us. And as I mentioned, we're going to fly through the stuff that really didn't change, but I'm doing this purposely so that you get a cohesive view of the BMPs. All right, so we have the BMP category, good site management, and part of good site management is identifying the products that are going to be used at the job site, identifying what's going to be produced and what you're using. Now, of course, we can categorize that, and we have products and materials that are meant to be outdoors, and that's fine. We don't need to be as concerned about those, but the things that could be exposed to stormwater and mobilized by stormwater or wind, we definitely want to have that as a part of our pollutant source assessment that will go into the SWIP plan. And then that needs to be constantly updated as the project progresses. And as new materials are brought onto the project, we want to make sure we are identifying those, we understand where they're being stored, how stormwater and wind may affect that, and so keep a good list there. Also, under good housekeeping are BMPs that apply to erodible stockpiles. Now, you're going to see stockpiles show up several times in attachment D, just as before. And if you remember in the part 1 of this 5-part series, we talked about how the permit was reorganized, and it used to be attachments C, D, and E for risk levels 1, 2, and 3, respectively. Now it's all the BMPs are contained in attachment D. And this first section that we're covering are BMPs that are true of all risk levels. And then a little bit later on, we'll cover a few additional BMPs for risk levels 2 and 3. But the stuff we're covering right now is applicable to everyone. So as far as stockpiles, notice what it says. Apply BMPs to erodible stockpile construction materials, such as soil, spoils, fly ash, stucco, hydrated lime, to prevent erosion and pollutant transport. Now, notice what it says and what it doesn't say. It doesn't say thou shalt cover it with a plastic cover. It doesn't say you will put a fiber roll necklace around the pile. It doesn't say that. Therefore, we have some discretion here, but what it does say is a little more performance-based. It's saying whatever BMPs you use, you need to prevent erosion and you need to prevent pollutant transport. In other words, that stockpile from spreading out. And so the first stage of erosion is raindrop erosion, right? So that's where we get the cover. We need to keep the raindrop from causing the erosion, and that's where the cover comes from, and it's totally reasonable. But again, notice it doesn't say it has to be black plastic. It could be something else to prevent raindrop erosion from occurring. Also, it definitely does not say, which I think is often ridiculous, the fiber roll necklace that goes around it. I'm not quite sure what good that does, but it seems to be very commonplace. I prefer placing the stockpiles in a place where they can't spread. And every site's different, every situation's different. But if I have a choice, I'm going to put that stockpile in a place where it's just not going to really spread, and that will do a whole lot more than the fiber roll ringed around the stockpile. All right, let's move on. So store chemicals in watertight containers with secondary containment to prevent any spillage or leakage, or store in a completely enclosed storage area. That's all pretty much the same as what we've seen before. Now, one thing I do want to note is not all of these pictures are good examples. We have some bad examples here. If you were on a Caltrans job and you saw those cans of gasoline there in the bottom left corner, that would be a violation. Yeah, you would need to get that in containment and undercover. But yeah, keep those chemicals in a place where they're not going to be exposed to stormwater. And if you did have a spill, it'd be contained. Minimize the exposure of construction materials to precipitation. Construction materials do not include materials and equipment that are designed to be outdoors. So a second reference to what we saw initially there. And it's, again, all about really placement. How do you place these materials? Place them in such a way that they're not going to be exposed to wind and rain. Track out. Now, again, look at this and note what it says and what it doesn't say. So it says implement BMPs to control offsite tracking of sediment and loose construction and landscape materials. It doesn't say you shall use TC1, which is both a Caltrans and a Casca spec. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say it. You got to use 3x5 rock with a grizzly. No, it just says use BMPs, and it's really performance-based. If you don't have any track out happening, then you got good BMPs. But you need to have BMPs in place to prevent that track out from happening. So if you can effectively accomplish that with 1-inch ballast rock, then great, that's fine. Now, there's a caveat here. If your SWIP calls out a certain spec, then you got to do that. You got to do what your SWIP says, because there's other references in the permit that says you will implement your SWIP. So if your SWIP writer called out the TC1 spec, well, then that's what needs to happen. Now, if you don't think that's necessary or you don't want to go with that BMP, then it's between you and your QSD to maybe change that and go with something that you still think is effective. And as long as it really is effective, then you're compliant with the permit. But make sure that your SWIP lines up with what you're doing in the field and lines up with the permit. So, all right. Implement BMPs to control the discharge of plastic materials and limit the use of plastic materials when more sustainable, environmentally friendly alternatives exist. Dischargers shall consider the use of plastic materials resistant to solar degradation, where plastic materials are deemed necessary. So on the left, actually, this is a good example on the left. Now that looks like black plastic, but it's not. It's black geotextile um, that is placed on that slope. And then in the background, you see even a sprayed on hydraulic mulch. So that's a good example there. On the right, we have a fiber roll that has a monofilament netting that certainly can become trash. It can become microplastics. It can be an entrapment hazard for for critters. So yeah, it is a that would not be consistent with this particular uh, requirement in the attachment D. All right, dischargers shall implement good housekeeping measures for waste management, which at a minimum shall consist of the following. So first, minimize the discharge of pollutants from equipment and vehicle washing, wheel wash water, masonry wash waters, and other wash waters. Wash waters shall be captured and treated prior to discharge or disposed of at the permitted facility that can accept that waste to mitigate impacts to water quality. So really, that's not a new requirement. That's been in the permit all along. And of course, we look at things like you see on the right about a washout of a concrete truck or chute onto the ground. You know, we point to that and go, no, that's definitely not compliant. Now, I love that video actually because you know your eyes are immediately drawn to the obvious, the guy washing out onto the ground. Um, but what do you see on the left in that video? You see the pumper truck, right? And they're literally pouring hundreds, if not thousands, of yards of wet cement onto the ground. So, which one is the bigger hazard here? Of course, one of those is clearly non-compliant. But now the other thing is when you do your pollutant source assessment, too many QSDs, you know, they only focus on the earthwork and maybe on concrete work, but they forget the other trades. And one of the trades that, you know, I think needs a lot of attention are stucco workers. If you think about stucco operation, they have every pollutant we're concerned about. They have um, gravels and sands, and so they have sediment issues. They have pH altering chemicals in their stucco mixes. They have solid waste from the plastic they use and the bags that they have. They have oil and grease from the equipment they're using. They have non-stormwater discharges. So they have everything. And so when we're doing these pollutant source assessments, we need to think about the other trades that hardly ever get any attention that are present on the site as well when it comes to implementing wash water and cure water. All right. Porta potties, yeah, lots been said about porta potties over the years. Now these regulations really didn't change. They're pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past permit. Provide containment, secondary containment, in other words, of sanitation facilities to prevent discharges of pollutants to stormwater drainage systems or receiving water. Now, you know, I think there's been also a lot of misdirected attention to porta potties too. I've been on so many job sites where people point to the lack of a containment tray. And they'd say, yeah, containment tray on these porta potties. If you don't have one, we're writing you up. That's an issue. Well, is that really the containment that this permit is talking about? And I would argue that probably not, for various reasons. Number one is, when does that containment tray fill up? Well, it's first storm event of the year, right? Yeah, and when is it empty? Usually the first hot week, dry week, where it can evaporate of the year. So during most of the storm season, it's full because of just rainwater. The other thing is, when are we concerned about porta potties? Typically, it's when they blow over, right? You know, or knocked over. That's when it's a real issue. So what is that tray doing for you? It's not much. So when I talk about containment, I'm talking more about positioning of these porta potties, where you place them. It's really a placement question in my mind. so that if you do have an upset of some sort, it's really not going anywhere. It's staying right in that general area. It's not flowing to a nearby storm drain inlet. It's not in the curb and gutter of the street. And if it gets tipped over, going right down to a drain inlet. It's maybe in a low spot, either a natural low spot, or maybe you took a loader and you carved out a little bit of a low spot. So that if we have this upset or a mechanical failure or it starts leaking, it's pretty much just going to stay right there. To me, if it does blow over, then it's contained. I think that is really the intent of it, but that's just John's opinion on this. Clean or replace sanitation facilities, inspect them regularly for leaks and spills. Yes, of course. All right, now we move to trash bins. Now, I lobbied hard when the comment period came out for the 2022 CGP. I lobbied hard. I sent letters in to the water board through the public comment process about trash bins, just to get some reasonableness in the attachment D. And so when I saw the first one, when I was first reviewing this new permit, I saw D here. Keep debris or trash and waste containers as if it's subject to transport from the site by wind or runoff. I thought, oh, great. They listened to my comments. And I was all excited until I read E. Cover the waste disposal containers at the end of every business day and during a precipitation event. I'm like, oh, man, they didn't take it out. Well, that is one of the biggest areas of non-compliance. If you've been at any construction site, especially in the summer, for a fact that unless they're fortunate enough to have a bin provider that has this very convenient lid to put over it, like you see in the photo there, they're not getting covered at the end of every day. Not at most sites, at least in my experience, they're not. Because it's a problem. It's hard to cover it. You take some manpower. Wind is susceptible to wind. It can blow off. If it does rain, it just becomes a pool that now what? What do we do with this water? It's going to wash the trash anyways. Or, you have the homeless that are taking it away. And those tarps are quite valuable to them. So, it just doesn't happen. And so I was hoping that we might have a little more functional requirements here, but unfortunately, this is what we have. So be aware of that. Prevent discharges from waste disposal containers, stormwater drainage system, or the receiving water. In other words, if it does, rain falls on it or wet materials are placed in it and it starts leaking, that's a problem. And that's going to trigger a non-visible pollutant sampling, most likely. So pay attention to that. All right, and then contain and securely protect stockpiled waste materials from wind and precipitation unless actively being used. And secure and contain concrete washout areas and other washout areas that may contain additional pollutants to minimize discharge into the underlying soil and onto surrounding areas. Washout areas shall be covered prior to and during a precipitation event. And again, these are not great examples. All of these are not great examples of what they're asking for here. And then dischargers shall implement good housekeeping when it comes to vehicles. So how you store your vehicles, how you fuel them, washing of them. Well, that was under washing activities, cleaning up leaks immediately. And notice, remember, when we were covering non-visible pollutant sampling triggers by quickly remediating a spill area and satisfactorily addressing it, could prevent you from having to do non-visible pollutant sampling now. And then discharge shall implement good housekeeping for landscape materials, which shall consist of the following. Here's another mention to stockpiles, and then packaged landscape materials. Of course, this is just common sense. If you have packaged fertilizers, you don't want the rain to fall on it, not just for stormwater quality, but you don't want to waste that expensive material. So you want to keep it packaged and out of the rain. If you are stockpiling a mulch like that, when is it not a stockpile? When you spread it out, right? So spread it out. And then discontinue the application of any erodible landscape material at least 2 days before a forecasted precipitation event as defined by attachment B or during periods of precipitation. Okay, so here is another use of that term forecasted precipitation event. It has a very specific definition in this permit. It is not a qualified precipitation event. It is different. We won't take the time to go into it. I have, again, a newsletter that I put on that. You will also hear about this on the reissuance review. Now, the one negative thing about what they did on the reissuance review is they did an awesome job of defining the 4 storm events. They did. But after I watched that, I'm like, okay, so what? All right, I know what the 4 events are. What do I do with it? You know, when does a forecasted precipitation event play into things? Well, here's one of them. Here's one place where that very specific and somewhat difficult to define storm event occurs. And so pay attention to that. And I also happen to believe it will be far less likely to have a forecasted precipitation event than a qualifying precipitation event. So you may be discontinuing landscape application of erodible landscape materials less often than you think. So get to know that definition for sure. And then, of course, apply erodible landscape materials, including fertilizers, at the manufacturer's recommendations at good agronomic rates. And then this one's talking about air deposition, and you cannot be sending particles off site, and you can't be causing wind erosion to occur. And then document all of these housekeeping BMPs in the SWIP for each of the phases. Now, notice in this permit, the construction phases were, well, maybe a little more definition was given to them or a little more enhanced in this permit. So let's take a look at the phases they're identifying in this permit. It says construction phases at traditional land development projects include demolition and pre-development site preparation phase, which is new. That wasn't in the previous permit. Grading and land development phase, streets and utility phase, vertical construction phase, and final landscaping and site stabilization phase. So the phases have been a little bit enhanced in this permit. So pay attention to that, especially if you're developing your new SWIP templates. All right, before we move on to non-stormwater, let me get caught up on some of the comments here. Let me back up here and see what we got. All right. Okay, I see somebody was having problems with it. All right, good. Which website can we find the recording on the workshops? Rebecca typed it into, or somebody typed it into, thank you for typing it into the chat. All right. One reason for fiber roll surrounded stockpile on erosion prevention, way down to prevent runoff from eroding. Yeah, if you're going to use a stockpile, or if you're going to use fiber roll around a stockpile, definitely give it some weight. Put some gravel bags on it or something like that. Otherwise, it's just too light that it floats. Not that it won't do any good, although I often have wondered if the fiber roll is just holding the plastic down. And not much more. But remember, the whole point is keeping the stockpile from spreading. So kind of use your best professional judgment to think if that unweighted fiber roll is going to keep anything from spreading. If you think so, then great, use it. But otherwise, go with a different BMP or enhance it, as Mel was pointing out here. Another tracking requirement to point out that the water board will require if they visit is risk level 2 and 3. Yes, we're going to get to that. It's later on in this, but yeah, we will get to that. But it says discharge shall limit construction activity to and from the project to entrances and exits that employ effective controls to prevent offsite tracking. Yeah, that is a risk level 2 and 3 requirement. Right now, we've just been covering what's required of everybody. And this is one of the reasons why I like some of the new developments that are coming out with BMPs. You remember it's the BAT, BCT, right? So we're always seeing new technologies coming out. The FODs, track mats, they have their fans and they have their non-fans, I understand. But one of the good things about those are they're easy to replace. When you put a TC1 down, and years ago we priced out a TC1, and without the rumble strip, the metal rumble strip, this was probably 10 years ago. It was $5,000 back then to put one in. I'm sure it's much more now. The FODs, the nice thing is you can pick those up, shake them off, get the knocked off dirt off of them, and relocate them pretty easily. So if your project is transient, like a lot of highway projects are, or roadway projects are, and you have new entrances and exits all the time, then that might be a great technique to make sure that you're always using one, because you can't just pick up a TC1 and move it. You got to install it all new. All right. Good. I think we got caught up here. So, all right, awesome. All right, so let's talk about non-stormwater management. And notice here in this section, it doesn't say you can't wash. It doesn't say you can't wash. It doesn't say you can't use water. What it says is you can't discharge water to a surface water or to an MS4, municipal stormwater system, right? So whether that's washing vehicles or cleaning streets, sometimes the best way to clean off a street, especially before you're going to release the project, is using water. Now, you just can't let that wash water go off site or go into a receiving water or the MS4. So you might go down to the down gradient manhole, put a pneumatic plug in there, and do a great wash down, collect your water in that manhole, and then either using a vac truck or maybe a trash pump or something, pump out that water, either haul it off to an appropriate disposal facility, or even if you feel that water's not contaminated, other than maybe some turbidity, then maybe apply it to an area that can infiltrate in that water. So that might be a great way to comply with this. But if you are using water, just make sure you're not allowing it to discharge off-site. All right. Here's a brand new area, brand new BMP, and this is for topsoil, preserve existing topsoil. In fact, it's a whole new BMP category. They combined two older categories, runoff and erosion control, into a single category, and made topsoil its own category. So let's take a closer look at this. It says dischargers shall preserve existing topsoil unless infeasible, and that's an important point there, through the following practices. Stockpiling existing topsoil is one, or transferring topsoil to other locations to deploy and reestablish vegetation prior to termination of coverage. Or the other one is stabilizing disturbed topsoil during construction, so that you're not losing it or burying it. It's there, it's protected, and it's going to be used as a growing media later. Now, it says preserving the existing topsoil is not required where the intended function of a specific area of the site dictates that the topsoil be disturbed or removed. Now, they gave an example here. I really wish they would have given more examples, because I think there are other legitimate examples. This certainly is one, that if the topsoil contains an invasive seed bank and the purpose of the project is to maybe restore the area, restore the vegetation, then yeah, you don't need to keep that topsoil. You'll be bringing in probably new, healthy, seed-free growing media for that particular project. But I can think of lots of other examples where it's not feasible to manage the topsoil, or where the intended function is not to have topsoil. In fact, having topsoil would even impede the intended function. So places like roadway projects, where you need to get a certain compaction, where that organic material in that topsoil is going to prevent you from getting the compaction you need. Obviously, that needs to go. Now, hopefully, there are other places on the project where some of that maybe can be reutilized into the low impact development and landscaped areas bordering that project. But probably on a good sized roadway project, not all of it is going to be needed. So you're going to want to really pay attention to that. Okay, here's a question. What is the proper thickness of the topsoil layer? Is it top 6 inches or 12 inches? Well, Juan, they don't say in this permit, and so at least not here. Now there is some maybe indications of what would be an acceptable thickness in indirectly in this permit in the water balance calculator portion for the post-construction BMPs. But even there, you're given some flexibility as far as your thickness is concerned. So typically we're looking at 6 to 18 inches of topsoil. That would be what most MS4 permits would point to in their post-construction design criteria, and what the water balance calculator would, generally be at. But yeah, they don't go into detail here. All right. Now, erosion control. So here's a new area. Well, it's not a new area, but it's new in that they combined a couple things. And it's also new that we're going to see some new BMPs here. Now, this is also a little bit of an oddity in this permit, where, up to this point, most of the BMPs we've talked about have been things the contractor's going to do in the field, things they're going to install, prohibitions are going to put in place, like not throwing your trash on the ground, not washing out. So it's things that the contractor will do. Now, you will notice in this list that a good number of these BMPs are what I call engineering BMPs. They're BMPs that are going to be done or need to be done before the project ever starts. You'll see what I mean as we go through it. So let's take a look at it. Erosion control discharge shall implement the following practices to eliminate or minimize site erosion. Erosion control BMPs, except for sprayed products, shall be available on site or at a nearby location, such as a laydown area, year round, not just before the rainy season, not just during the rainy season, but year round, with trained persons able to deploy the product under the direction of a QSP. So that was the other reference I was mentioning to having to stockpile these BMPs. Now, it is interesting where that shows up, and this might also, you might want to pay some attention to this, is some things like a fiber roll. Is that an erosion control? Not typically. Typically, it's a sediment control. Sill fence, typically a sediment control. What is an erosion control? Like a mat, erosion control mats. Now, before I get too much into the weeds, fiber rolls actually, when they're used as linear sediment controls on a slope, they actually are both sediment and erosion controls, because they are what prevents a rill from forming down gradient of it. But I don't know. I think the concept is that you just keep your BMPs there, whether they're erosion or sediment control. But it is interesting to note this shows up in the erosion control side. And it's specifically saying you got to keep erosion control BMPs in place. All right. So, So you have to have them, and here's what your BMPs need to do. One, implement effective wind erosion control. So you need to have materials and methods available to prevent wind erosion. Number one way that's used on most sites is water, but certainly not the only way to do that. There's dust pelletives that you can apply of all sorts of products that you can use, and even the passive treatment chemicals we were talking about, the PAM, can be used as a wind erosion control. Preserve existing vegetation. Yeah, of course, that's always been something we want to do. Minimize the amount of soil exposed during the construction activity. Well, here we go. Now, we're very used to hearing that phrase in the stormwater world. But if you think about it, a grading contractor, in most instances, is really only doing what the grading plans say for them to do. I mean, they're not paid to disturb other areas. Now, not that they don't, but generally speaking, they're following the grading plans. And so C is the first example of what I call an engineering BMP, that the grading plan is what needs to say and determine about minimizing the amount of soil exposed during construction activity. D, also kind of new, this is new in this permit, minimize the disturbance of steep slopes. Again, the grading contractor isn't looking at a slope going, wow, that's a steep slope, I think I'll disturb it. No, they're following the grading plans, right? Or should be. So really, that's an engineering BMP too. E, schedule earthwork to minimize the amount of disturbed area when feasible. Now, okay, the contractor has a certain say over this, has a certain ability to do that. Certainly, portions of the project within their control, within their scheduling control, can be altered so that they're doing maybe the things that are going to have more soil disturbance or more vulnerability during the dry season. But it's also largely the LRP's decision of when to start that project, and the project management team, who might be outside of the general contractor, who's actually dictating when this project needs to happen. So this is, again, a little bit of an engineering BMP here. F, immediately initiate stabilization for disturbed areas whenever earth-disturbing activities have permanently ceased on any portion of the site or temporarily ceased on any portion of the site and will not resume for a period exceeding 14 calendar days. Okay, this is a rewording of an often misquoted section of the 2009 general permit. You probably have heard many individuals, contractors in particular, go, oh, I don't need to put any erosion controls on that. We haven't had 14 days of inactivity. Well, that isn't really how the 2009 permit read, because there wasn't a period after that. There was a comma, and it went on to say, and all open space, and all backfilled trenches, and all completed lots. So this is a rewording to help take out the ambiguity. Now, I've been on many projects, in particular roadway projects, where the contractor has a bid line item for applying hydraulic mulch or hydroseed. And they have budgeted usually one mobilization for that. And so what they're trying to do is get as much earthwork done before the rainy season comes in so that they can call for the hydroseeders to come out. And so they may have already come, this time of the year, end of September, 80%, 90% of the project done. It's done, but they're working on that last 10 to 20%. And they're trying to get that finished and before they call out the hydroseeders. So here we get into the middle or end of October, and all right, we're ready. We're going to call them. Well, they call them, and what happens? Well, they're busy, you know, the hydroseeders are busy. This is their busy time of year. And I go, yeah, we'll get to you in 3 weeks. Yeah, we got you scheduled 3 weeks from now. And so, you know, now we see rains coming in November. And I can't tell you how many projects I've been out that the rain came in and they were unprotected. Nothing was covered. And it was exactly for that reason. Where, you know, 80, 90% of the project could have been covered long time ago. But it was really because of the budgeting, the way they budgeted it, and they only wanted one mobilization. And so they're waiting the last minute. Well, when the water board sees this, they can point to this and go, immediately. When? Immediately initiate stabilization for disturbed areas whenever earth disturbing activities have permanently ceased on any portion of the site or temporarily ceased for and will not resume for 14 calendar days. So this language tightens that up and really prevents that very typical scenario from happening. All right, next one, minimize soil compaction areas other than where the intended function of a specific area dictates that it be compacted. Again, that's an engineering BMP. That's not something the contractor's deciding to do. H, reestablish vegetation or non-vegetative erosion controls as soon as possible. Okay, got that. That's pretty typical. I, if feasible, divert up gradient run-on water from contacting areas of exposed soils disturbed by construction activities or convey run-on through the site in a manner that prevents erosion from areas of construction, does not compromise the effectiveness of erosion sediment perimeter controls. And then let's do J as well. Run-on from flowing onto a site from offsite areas may be separated from a site stormwater discharge to eliminate commingling contribution. Run-on diversion shall occur prior to entering an area affected by construction activity. Run-on flow diversion may be conveyed through or around the construction activity through a pipe or conveyance, etc. So this is where a whole nother section of BMPs got brought into erosion. Run-on used to be its own section. But run-on is something that QSDs and engineers need to look closely at. This year, with the 12 atmospheric storm events, we saw phenomenal erosion occur. Erosion like I haven't seen ever in my career. The biggest one I saw was up in the Altamont Hills. It was not a gully, I'd call it a gorge that was cut that was 50 feet deep, 75 feet wide, and about a half mile long. And that was cut in 2 months. In 2 months. And I went to numerous large scale events like that. And in every case, the culprit was lack of run-on controls. In fact, it really pointed to the engineering. In that big instance, they had wonderful BMPs in place, amazing BMPs in place. But when you get so much water moving so fast, there's nothing you can do about it. In fact, you know, a case in point, a few years ago, Oroville Dam was eroding concrete. Steel enforced concrete was eroding because of the volume and the rate of the water leaving that dam. So you got to run-on really is an engineering BMP as well, and you got to do that. All right. Limit use of plastic, we already seen that, and control stormwater and non-stormwater discharges downstream. Again, that's kind of a BMP, or engineering BMP, and M is definitely an engineering BMP. Control peak flow rates and total volume of stormwater and authorized non-stormwater discharges to minimize channel and stream bank erosion and scour in the immediate vicinity of the discharge points. So you really, you know, a lot of these are pointing back to the design team. It's not the contractor putting out BMPs. It's the design team saying, here's how this project is going to be done. Then another erosion control BMP is using those sprayed on products. And if you're using that, whether it's a passive treatment type or a PAM, it's not technically in this permit called passive treatment, but if you're using one of those polyacrylamides or a hydraulic mulch, hydroseed, BFM. You need to follow the manufacturer's instructions and apply it per their guidance. All right. Just because of lack time, I want to try to get through as much of this. We got 10 minutes remaining. So sediment controls really didn't change a whole lot. So you can take a look at this perimeter controls, and I've shared my thoughts in past workshops about perimeter controls. I remember perimeter doesn't mean necessarily all the way around the site, especially if it's going uphill. And then exits and entrances. Here's what Mel was pointing to. No, I'm sorry, that's coming up still. We're still in the one, but it's talking about entrance exits to sufficiently control erosion and sediment discharges, and design, install, and maintain effective sediment controls. And there's only one BMP still in the construction general permit that has a specific standard associated with it, and that's sediment basins, and that you have to follow the California Stormwater Quality Association's BMP handbook, specifically SC2 is the only BMP that specifically has a specification associated with it. Okay, now here's the new requirements for risk levels 2 and 3. So design and construct cut and fill slopes in a manner to ensure slope stability and to minimize erosion, including but not limited to these practices: reducing continuous slope lengths using terracing and diversions, reduce slope steepness, and roughen the slope surfaces with large cobble or track walking. Okay, so most of this, again, are engineering BMPs. It's happening before the project even starts. The one exception is probably track walking, but the rest of it is an engineering BMP. And then this one we're pretty familiar with, the linear sediment controls, but you will notice in table 1 that we have a couple of new additions to it. First off, they changed it from slope percentage slope ratio, but it's really kind of the same thing. But it used to be just 10, 15, and 20 was the spacing. Now shallower slopes have 35-foot spacing or at the QSD's discretion. And here's the one that Mel was pointing to: limit construction activity to and from the project to entrances and exits and employ effective controls to prevent offsite tracking of sediment. And then this is just talking about maintenance. Remove any excess sediment or construction activity related materials that are deposited on impervious roads by vacuuming or sweeping prior to any precipitation event. Notice what they took out of here. We don't have to do the daily inspections like we did in the 2009 permit. Not that that isn't a good idea, but it's not called for. You do not have to do the daily inspections. And then, of course, implement additional BMPs if the regional board requests you to do so. Another new one is surface water buffers. Now, surface water buffers really will only apply at certain sites. Obviously, you have to have a surface water near you, adjacent or passing through your project. And if you do have that scenario, the number one best BMP is to maintain a natural vegetated buffer between your work and that water body. The permit here says 50 feet is what they want. Now, if you can't do 50 feet, then the permit's going to allow you to do 50 feet plus mitigated BMPs. In other words, you will need to use the Russell 2 modeling tool to be able to quantify the benefit of a 50-foot buffer. And then you can then play with it in Russell 2 and add other BMPs, like maybe you're going to use some silt fence, or maybe you're going to use, like we saw in one of the passive treatment presentations, that double row of silt fence with a area that's been treated with polyacrylamide in between. Or maybe you're going to use compost socks, but you'll pick your suite of BMPs, you'll quantify the soil loss reduction using Russell 2, And as long as that is equal to or less than the soil loss of a natural 50-foot buffer, then you can use that as well. And then pesticide application, this really hasn't changed. You can only use pesticides authorized through the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. Demolition, this is a new BMP. Let's take a look at this. Discharge shall prevent exposing demolition materials to precipitation. Now, a lot of people freak out when they read this first. So let's read this carefully. A lot of people go, what, are they crazy? I can't cover our demolition with plastic. Well, that's not exactly what they're saying. So let's read this carefully. Demolition materials should be covered with an impermeable barrier such as but not limited to plastic sheeting, which I kind of have to laugh. Oh, you mean that stuff we're supposed to try to eliminate? Prior to precipitation to prevent known contaminants from being mobilized. Dischargers unable to cover demolition or demolish material that are not previously investigated or found to be absent of applicable pollutants in reportable quantities shall sample for any non-visible pollutants that may be in stormwater discharges, such as, but not limited to, asbestos, leaded paint, or PCBs. All right, so they kind of worded this backwards. Basically, what this is saying is if you've done a phase 1 or phase 2 environmental site assessment and you've eliminated the possibility of having toxics such as asbestos, leaded paint, PCBs, then you don't need to cover it with plastic and you don't need to sample. Now, if you have not eliminated the possibility of it, you can cover it with plastic and you don't need to sample. If you can't cover it with plastic and you haven't eliminated the possibility, then you need to sample. That's what it's really saying. It's not saying you have to cover it with plastic. And I've had plenty of people go, do you know how big our demolition area is? Yeah, but it's not saying that. All right, and this is an important point, not new, but important. You got 72 hours to begin corrective action when you discover something that needs corrective action, a BMP deficiency or an NAL exceedance. You got 72 hours to begin it and then to complete it as soon as possible. And something that's a little bit new here is you have to complete it as soon as possible, but also notice what it says, prior to the next forecasted precipitation event. That is a specific definition. It's not the next event that you see on your weather report. It's not a QPE. It is a very specific definition. Check out Glossary B, read our newsletter, watch the reissuance review. It is something very specific. All right. Wow, we made it. 2 minutes to spare. I didn't know if that was possible. So let's see if I can grab how many of these questions I can in 2 minutes. I think some of you were just going back and forth. So I'm just scanning here, seeing what we got. All right, these engineered BMPs, sounds like California needs more outreach to the design grading engineers to alert them of these. Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100%. Nothing will change if the outreach doesn't take place. Yeah, we need not the contractors in the class. We need the engineers. Now, a lot of them are. There are 3,300 self-certified QSDs, and a good number of those are PEs. So it is happening somewhat. Many engineers will see the rill and gully erosion root cause of low soil compaction combined with run-on. So yeah. And again, the minimizing compaction, that's out of my pay grade. I am an erosion and control expert. I'm a QSD and a CPESC. We're now talking about engineering and design of a site. That's why the professionals have to really tackle this. And then we just oversee what's happening based on what was designed. So yeah. All right, so a lot of these comments are just going back to a lot of that. Where can we find Russell 2 factors for silt fence? Not sure. And to be honest, I avoid Russell 2 as much as possible. I know I shouldn't say that, but I have my thoughts on it. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that. So, all right, I think that's most of the comments. Thank you for being a part of this Stormwater Awareness Week workshop. I know we went through the BMPs fast and furious. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. In fact, next slide here is my contact information. There's my email. Take a quick picture of that or go back and look at the recording when it's done. We have a saying around here that advice is free over coffee. So call me up, say, John, pour yourself a cup. We need to talk. And then tomorrow, last one, we go into TMDLs, the scary world of TMDLs. And I'm going to explain why it's so good to be from Northern California. All right, we'll see you at the next one.